Beloved, there are moments in life when the soul becomes tired of questions, when the heart grows weary of waiting, and when the mind begins to wonder if answers will ever come. There are seasons when it feels as though your situation has been suspended between hope and disappointment, between promise and reality, between prayer and manifestation. You have prayed, you have fasted, you have believed, and yet the matter remains unresolved. But hear this truth today. There is a God who settles cases. There is a realm beyond human arguments, beyond legal systems, beyond opinions, beyond limitations, where divine judgment is released with precision and power. In that realm, no accusation can stand, no delay can persist, and no opposition can prevail when God rises to speak. When God decides to intervene, he does not negotiate with impossibilities. He rewrites outcomes. He does not consult with fear. He establishes victory. He does not respond according to human timelines. He acts according to eternal wisdom. There are moments in life when a person realizes that effort alone is not enough, intelligence alone is not enough, and persistence alone is not enough. There comes a point where the heart understands that beyond human striving, there is a higher order that governs outcomes. Divine settlement is not accidental. It is the response of God to a life that has learned the mystery of persistent faith and alignment with his will. It is the moment when heaven steps into earthly affairs and declares that enough is enough, that the season of struggle has ended and the era of manifestation has begun. Persistent faith is not loud emotions or temporary excitement. It is a quiet, stubborn confidence in the character of God. It is the decision to believe even when circumstances contradict your expectations. It is the courage to stand when results delay and voices around you suggest that nothing will change. Persistent faith refuses to be defined by visible evidence. It is rooted in the conviction that God is faithful, that his promises are not empty words, and that his timing, though mysterious, is always perfect. Many people start with faith, but only those who persist encounter divine settlement. Because divine settlement is not released to casual believers, it is revealed to those who refuse to let go of God. Alignment with God's will is the second dimension of divine settlement. Faith without alignment can produce noise, but alignment with God's will produces results. Many prayers fail, not because God is unwilling, but because the heart is misaligned. When a person seeks divine settlement while walking in contradiction, conflict arises in the spirit. Alignment means that your desires begin to mirror God's intentions. Your choices reflect his principles, and your direction agrees with his purpose. It is the moment when your life stops arguing with God and starts cooperating with him. When alignment happens, resistance in the spirit realm collapses and divine intervention becomes inevitable. Divine settlement is not just God answering prayers. It is God restoring order. It is God stepping into chaos and establishing structure. It is God correcting injustices that human systems fail to address. It is God rewriting narratives that seemed permanent. When God settles a case, he does not merely fix a problem. He reveals his sovereignty. He shows that no situation is too complex, no delay is too long, and no opposition is too strong for his authority. Divine settlement is proof that God is not a spectator in human affairs. He is a judge, a defender, and a restorer. There are people who have prayed for years with no visible change. There are people who have done everything they know to do, and still see no breakthrough. For such people, divine settlement feels like a distant dream. But the truth is that God often works in silence before he speaks in power. He prepares hearts, rearranges circumstances, and dismantles invisible barriers long before the visible breakthrough appears. What looks like delay is often divine orchestration. What feels like silence is often strategic preparation. When the moment of settlement arrives, it comes suddenly, decisively, and undeniably. Persistent faith teaches the soul patience. It teaches the heart endurance. It teaches the spirit discipline. Through persistence, a person learns to trust God beyond emotions. They learn to pray beyond convenience. They learn to stand beyond comfort. In this process, faith matures from childish expectation to spiritual confidence. And it is this mature faith that attracts divine settlement. God is drawn to hearts that trust him, not only when things work, but also when nothing seems to work. Such faith becomes a spiritual language that heaven understands and responds to. Alignment with God's will also requires surrender. It is impossible to align with God while insisting on controlling everything. Surrender is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is the recognition that God sees what you cannot see and knows what you cannot know. When you surrender your pride, your fears, your timelines, and your assumptions to God, you create space for divine intervention. Alignment means saying, not my will, but yours. And when that prayer becomes genuine, divine settlement becomes inevitable, because God is committed to settling the cases of those who trust his wisdom more than their own understanding. Divine settlement transforms identity. Before settlement, a person may see themselves as a victim of circumstances, a prisoner of delay, or a casualty of injustice. But after settlement, the same person becomes a testimony, a symbol of restoration, and a witness of divine power. God does not just change situations, he changes perspectives. He lifts people from shame to honor, from confusion to clarity, from weakness to authority. When God settles a case, he does not only answer the question, he redefines the person. The mystery of divine settlement is that it often comes when hope seems exhausted. It arrives when human options are finished. It manifests when logic says it is impossible. This is because divine settlement is not governed by human probability. It is governed by divine purpose. God waits until human strength is insufficient so that his glory becomes undeniable. When he settles a case, there is no doubt that it was his doing. There is no confusion about who deserves the glory. There is no argument about whether it was coincidence or divine intervention. Therefore, understand this truth deeply. Divine settlement is not random. It is the response of God to persistent faith and alignment with his will. If you refuse to give up, if you refuse to compromise your values, if you refuse to abandon God because of delay, and if you continuously align your heart with his purpose, your case cannot remain unresolved forever. There will come a day when God speaks into your situation with authority, and everything that resisted you will bow. That day is not a myth, it is a spiritual certainty. And when it comes, you will realize that every tear, every prayer, every waiting season was preparing you for the moment when God would finally settle your case. Every unresolved case in life has layers that go beyond what the eyes can see. Many people focus only on the physical dimension of their problems, the visible struggles, the obvious obstacles, the external pressures. But the truth is that behind many visible battles lie invisible roots. Behind repeated failures, strange delays, unexplained conflicts, and persistent limitations, there is often a spiritual dimension that cannot be solved by human wisdom alone. This is why understanding the spiritual root of a matter is essential if true resolution is to occur. Human systems are designed to handle physical problems. Doctors treat the body, lawyers address legal matters, counselors manage emotional issues, and institutions create policies to regulate behavior. These systems are valuable, but they have limitations. They can address symptoms, but they cannot always touch the origin. When a problem keeps repeating itself despite sincere effort, when solutions seem temporary, and when progress collapses again and again, it is often a sign that the root has not been addressed. Spiritual roots require spiritual solutions, and prayer is the key that reaches where human tools cannot reach. Prayer is not just speaking words, it is engaging the unseen realm with spiritual authority. When a person prays with understanding, they are not merely expressing emotions, they are confronting invisible forces, dismantling spiritual barriers, and invoking divine intervention. Many people pray casually, hoping that something will change, but powerful prayer is intentional, focused, and rooted in revelation. It recognizes that not every battle is fought with logic and strategy. Some battles are fought on the altar of prayer, where destinies are shaped and verdicts are issued. Consider the pattern of persistent struggles in people's lives. Some individuals experience repeated disappointments in relationships, careers, finances, or health. Others face constant opposition whenever they are about to make progress. Some feel trapped in cycles they cannot explain. These patterns are not always random. Often, they reveal deeper spiritual conflicts that must be confronted with spiritual tools. When prayer rises with clarity and authority, it exposes these roots and dismantles their influence. Understanding the spiritual root of a problem also changes how a person sees their situation. Instead of blaming themselves endlessly or accusing others unfairly, they begin to discern that there is more happening than meets the eye. This does not remove personal responsibility, but it brings wisdom. It helps a person to fight the right battle in the right way. Many people exhaust themselves fighting symptoms while the root remains untouched. But when the root is addressed, the symptoms lose their power. Prayer also brings divine insight. When a person truly prays, they do not only ask God to change their situation, they ask Him to reveal the truth behind it. In the place of prayer, hidden things are exposed, confusing situations become clearer, and strategies are revealed. Prayer aligns the human mind with divine perspective. It allows a person to see beyond appearances and understand the spiritual dynamics influencing their life. With this understanding, prayer becomes precise rather than random, strategic rather than emotional. There is also a transformative dimension of prayer. When someone confronts spiritual roots through prayer, they are not only changing external circumstances, they are also changing internal realities. Fear begins to lose its grip. Hopelessness gives way to confidence. Confusion is replaced by clarity. Through prayer, the heart becomes strengthened, the mind becomes renewed, and the spirit becomes empowered. This inner transformation is crucial because many battles are sustained by inner weaknesses. When prayer strengthens the inner man, the external battle begins to shift. It is important to understand that spiritual roots are not always negative in the obvious sense. Sometimes delays and struggles are connected to divine processes that are misunderstood. Not every difficulty is an attack. Some are preparations. But even in such cases, prayer is still essential because it helps a person to interpret their experiences correctly. Without prayer, a person may misread divine training as punishment or divine silence as abandonment. Prayer brings alignment with God's intention, preventing unnecessary frustration and confusion. Another mystery is that some spiritual roots are collective rather than individual. Families, communities, and even generations can experience patterns that seem difficult to break. Cycles of poverty, conflict, fear, or failure can persist across time. These patterns often have spiritual dimensions that require collective awareness and intentional prayer. When individuals rise with understanding and confront these roots, they not only change their own story, but also alter the narrative of those connected to them. Prayer is not instant magic. It is spiritual warfare and divine dialogue. Sometimes the root of a problem is deep, and the process of uprooting it requires persistence. This is why casual prayer rarely produces lasting change. But when prayer becomes a lifestyle rather than an emergency response, it gradually dismantles strongholds that seemed permanent. Over time, what once appeared impossible begins to shift, not because circumstances changed overnight, but because spiritual foundations were altered. When a person finally witnesses divine settlement, they often realize that the real battle was not external, but spiritual. They understand that what they thought was bad luck was actually a spiritual resistance, and what they thought was coincidence was divine orchestration. They see that prayer was not wasted effort, but strategic engagement with the unseen realm. Therefore, if a case remains unresolved, it is not enough to search for physical explanations alone. One must rise to confront the spiritual roots with wisdom, faith, and persistence. Prayer is not optional in this process. It is essential. It is the instrument through which hidden battles are revealed and resolved. When prayer addresses the root, not just the surface, true transformation occurs. And when the root is removed, the fruit changes permanently. This is the power of understanding that every unresolved case has a spiritual dimension that must be confronted through prayer, until divine settlement becomes a reality, and what once seemed impossible becomes a testimony of divine intervention. There is a profound truth that many people struggle to fully understand. God is not only loving, he is also just. He is not only merciful, he is also righteous. In a world where injustice often seems to prevail and wrongdoers sometimes appear to prosper, it is easy to question whether fairness truly exists. But beyond human systems and imperfect judgments, there stands a righteous judge whose verdicts are never biased, whose decisions are never corrupted, and whose justice is never delayed without purpose. God is a righteous judge who never ignores the cry of his people. Human justice is limited by knowledge, influence, emotions, and power. Judges can be misinformed, witnesses can lie, systems can be manipulated, and truth can be buried under layers of politics and corruption. Many people have experienced situations where they were misunderstood, falsely accused, overlooked, or unfairly treated. These experiences can leave deep wounds in the heart and create silent questions about fairness and destiny. But divine justice operates on a completely different level. God sees what humans cannot see. hears what humans cannot hear, and understands what humans cannot comprehend. Nothing is hidden from his sight, and no cry is lost in the vastness of time. When God is described as a righteous judge, it means that his judgments are based on truth, not appearance. He does not decide based on rumors, emotions, or pressure. He weighs motives, intentions, and realities that are invisible to human eyes. Many people suffer because their true story is never heard by others. But before God, every detail is known. Every silent tear is recorded. Every unspoken prayer is understood. Every injustice is noted. This is why the cry of the oppressed has power in the realm of God. It is not ignored, forgotten, or minimized. The cry of God's people is not always loud. Sometimes it is expressed through tears, through exhaustion, through confusion, or through silent endurance. Sometimes it is the cry of someone who has prayed for years without visible answers. Sometimes it is the cry of someone who has done everything right, yet keeps experiencing wrong outcomes. Sometimes it is the cry of someone who feels trapped in a situation they did not create. God does not measure cries by volume. He measures them by sincerity. A whisper from a broken heart can move heaven more than 1,000 words spoken without faith. One of the mysteries of divine justice is timing. Many people wonder why God does not intervene immediately when injustice occurs. They question why the wicked seem to succeed while the righteous struggle. But divine justice is not slow. It is strategic. God does not rush because he sees the entire picture, not just the present moment. He allows processes to unfold, not because he is indifferent, but because his judgments are designed to produce lasting transformation, not temporary relief. When God finally acts, his intervention is complete, undeniable, and irreversible. God's role as a righteous judge also means that he defends his people in ways they cannot defend themselves. There are battles that intelligence cannot win, arguments that logic cannot resolve, and conflicts that effort cannot overcome. In such moments, divine justice becomes the only hope. When God rises as a judge, he does not negotiate with injustice. He does not compromise with oppression. He does not tolerate manipulation. He speaks with authority, and realities shift. Doors that were locked open, accusations that seemed strong collapse, situations that appeared permanent dissolve. Another dimension of God's justice is restoration. Human justice often focuses on punishment, but divine justice goes beyond punishment to restoration. When God judges a case, he not only exposes wrong, he restores what was lost. He heals what was broken. He lifts those who were pushed down. He rewrites narratives that seemed finished. Divine justice is not merely about proving who was right. It is about rebuilding what was destroyed. This is why God's judgment is not cold or mechanical. It is filled with wisdom, compassion, and purpose. The knowledge that God is a righteous judge also changes how believers respond to injustice. Instead of becoming bitter, vengeful, or hopeless, they learn to trust divine judgment. This does not mean ignoring wrongdoing or accepting oppression, but it means refusing to let injustice define their identity. It means understanding that even when human systems fail, divine justice remains active. It means believing that no evil act goes unnoticed and no righteous act goes unrewarded. This faith gives strength to endure, courage to persevere, and peace in the midst of uncertainty. There is also a personal dimension to divine judgment. God does not only judge external enemies, he also examines the hearts of his people. His righteousness is not selective. He corrects, guides, and refines those he loves. Sometimes what feels like delay or difficulty is actually divine correction designed to align a person with their destiny. But even in correction, God remains just. He does not punish unnecessarily. He disciplines with purpose and restores with love. His justice is always balanced with mercy. When God finally settles a case, it often surprises everyone. Those who doubted begin to marvel. Those who opposed begin to retreat. Those who mocked begin to question their assumptions. And the one who cried in silence begins to testify openly. Divine justice has a way of revealing truth so clearly that no argument can deny it. When God acts as a righteous judge, his verdict speaks louder than human opinions. Therefore, to understand that God is a righteous judge who never ignores the cry of his people is to embrace hope in its purest form. It is to know that no pain is wasted, no injustice is permanent, and no cry is forgotten. It is to believe that even when the world seems unfair, God remains faithful. And it is to stand with confidence, knowing that the God who judges righteously will one day speak into every unresolved case. And when he does, his judgment will not only end the battle, but also establish a testimony that cannot be erased. Many people misunderstand delay. They interpret it as rejection, failure, or abandonment. When answers do not come quickly, when doors do not open as expected, and when promises seem distant, the human heart often concludes that God has said no. But delay is not always denial. In many cases, delay is a hidden form of preparation, a silent process through which God is shaping character, rearranging circumstances, and aligning destiny with purpose. What appears to be a setback is often a setup for a greater manifestation than the mind could have imagined. Delay has a way of testing faith. It reveals what a person truly believes about God. When things happen quickly, faith is easy. But when time stretches and answers seem absent, faith is refined. In delay, superficial belief is exposed and genuine trust is developed. A person learns whether they trust God only when things work, or whether they trust him even when nothing seems to move. This is why delay is often a spiritual classroom. It teaches patience, humility, endurance, and dependence on God rather than on circumstances. Preparation is rarely visible. Before greatness is revealed publicly, it is formed privately. Before promotion appears externally, transformation happens internally. Many people desire sudden breakthroughs without understanding the silent processes that make those breakthroughs sustainable. If God were to release certain blessings prematurely, they would become burdens rather than blessings. Some doors are not opened immediately because the person behind the door is not yet ready to walk through it. Delay, therefore, is not punishment. It is protection. In the season of delay, God often works on areas that people ignore. He strengthens the inner life, reshapes priorities, and corrects hidden weaknesses. A person may be praying for external change while God is focusing on internal alignment. They may be asking for new opportunities while God is refining their character. They may be demanding acceleration while God is teaching discipline. This can feel frustrating, but it is necessary. Without internal preparation, external success can lead to collapse. Delay ensures that when manifestation finally comes, it does not destroy the person who receives it. Delay also rearranges relationships and environments. Sometimes the people around a person are not meant to follow them into their next season. If promotion came too early, it would be surrounded by the wrong influences. Delay gives time for separation, alignment, and connection with the right people. It allows God to remove distractions and introduce strategic relationships. Many testimonies of success are built not only on personal effort, but also on divine connections that were formed during seasons of waiting. Another mystery of delay is perspective. When a person is delayed, they often focus on what they lack rather than what they are gaining. But in reality, delay often produces depth. It creates wisdom that cannot be taught in classrooms, resilience that cannot be learned through comfort, and spiritual sensitivity that cannot be developed in haste. The waiting season stretches the soul and expands the capacity of the heart. When the breakthrough finally arrives, the person is not only excited, but also equipped to handle it. Delay also exposes motives. Sometimes what a person wants is not aligned with why they want it. The waiting season forces reflection. It compels individuals to examine whether their desires are rooted in ego or purpose, in pride or service, in fear or faith. Through delay, God purifies intentions. He transforms selfish ambition into meaningful vision. When motives are purified, blessings become tools for impact rather than symbols of status. There is also a divine timing that governs manifestation. God operates with eternal calendars, not human impatience. He sees intersections that humans cannot see. He knows when circumstances, people, resources, and spiritual conditions will align perfectly. If manifestation happens too early, it may lack support. If it happens too late, it may lose relevance. But when it happens at the right time, it produces maximum impact. Delay, therefore, is often God's way of synchronizing events beyond human understanding. In many stories of transformation, the greatest testimonies emerge after long seasons of waiting. People who were once ignored become celebrated. Individuals who were once rejected become leaders. Situations that once seemed hopeless become examples of divine power. When looking back, these people often realize that if their prayers had been answered earlier, they would not have been ready to carry the weight of the answer. They understand that delay was not cruelty, it was mercy in disguise. Delay also builds spiritual authority. Those who have waited long develop a different kind of confidence. Their faith is not shallow. Their prayers are not casual. Their gratitude is not superficial. They know what it means to hold on when nothing moves. They know what it means to believe when evidence is absent. When such people finally rise, their voices carry weight, their testimonies carry power, and their presence carries influence. Delay has transformed them into vessels capable of sustaining glory. Yet delay is not meant to be permanent. It is a season, not a sentence. It is a process, not a conclusion. When preparation is complete, manifestation becomes inevitable. God does not prepare people forever. He prepares them for something. There comes a moment when waiting ends and fulfillment begins. There comes a time when silence is broken by divine intervention. There comes a day when what was delayed suddenly appears with speed and clarity. Therefore, understanding that delay is not denial changes how a person responds to waiting. Instead of despairing, they begin to learn. Instead of complaining, they begin to grow. Instead of quitting, they begin to strengthen their faith. They realize that every day of waiting is adding something to their destiny. And when the appointed time arrives, They will not only receive what they prayed for, they will also become the kind of person who can sustain it. In this light, delay is no longer an enemy. It becomes a teacher, a protector, and a preparer. It becomes the hidden workshop where God shapes destinies away from public eyes. And when the curtain finally lifts and manifestation appears, it will be clear that the delay was not a sign of rejection, but a divine strategy to produce a greater, deeper, and more glorious outcome than anyone could have imagined. Spiritual authority is not something that appears suddenly or exists only in words. It is a reality that is built, cultivated, and activated through understanding, alignment, and conviction. Many people pray, but not everyone prays with authority. Many people speak, but not everyone speaks with power. The difference lies in the depth of understanding and the strength of conviction behind their words. Spiritual authority is activated when a believer moves beyond emotional prayer and enters the realm of informed, intentional, and confident engagement with the spiritual world. Understanding is the foundation of authority. Without understanding, prayer becomes repetition rather than revelation. A person may speak many words, but if they do not understand who they are, who God is, and how spiritual laws operate, their words lack weight. Understanding reveals identity. When a believer truly understands their identity, they stop seeing themselves as helpless victims of circumstances and begin to see themselves as carriers of divine authority. This shift in perception changes the way they pray, speak, and respond to challenges. Conviction is the fuel of authority. Conviction is not mere optimism. It is deep-rooted certainty. It is the unshakable belief that what God has said is true, regardless of visible evidence. When a person speaks from conviction, their words carry force. They are not guessing, hoping, or experimenting. They are declaring what they know to be spiritually valid. Conviction transforms prayer from a request into a proclamation. It changes the tone of a believer from begging to commanding, from fear to confidence, from doubt to certainty. Spiritual authority is also rooted in alignment with divine principles. Authority cannot be separated from obedience. A person who wants to exercise spiritual authority while living in contradiction will experience frustration. Alignment creates harmony between heaven and earth. When a believer's life reflects the principles they proclaim, their words gain credibility in the spiritual realm. Authority is not just about what you say. It is about who you have become through consistent alignment with truth. When spiritual authority is activated, prayer changes its nature. Instead of being reactive, it becomes proactive. Instead of being driven by panic, it becomes guided by revelation. Instead of being random, it becomes strategic. A believer begins to address issues at their root rather than at their surface. They no longer pray only about symptoms. They confront the forces behind the symptoms. They do not only ask God to intervene, they partner with God to enforce divine will. Many people struggle because they underestimate the power of their spiritual position. They see themselves as small and powerless, forgetting that spiritual authority is not determined by physical size or social status. In the spiritual realm, authority is determined by alignment, understanding, and conviction. A person who truly understands their spiritual position can stand against forces that seem overwhelming. They can speak into situations that appear impossible. They can confront circumstances that others have accepted as permanent. Spiritual authority also requires discipline. It is not sustained by occasional prayer, but by consistent spiritual practice. A believer who wants to walk in authority must cultivate intimacy with God, sensitivity to the Spirit, and commitment to truth. Authority grows in the secret place before it manifests in public victories. Many people desire visible power without investing in invisible preparation. But true authority is forged in moments of solitude, reflection, obedience, and persistence. Another dimension of spiritual authority is responsibility. Authority is not given for pride, it is given for service. A believer who understands authority also understands accountability. They know that every declaration must align with divine purpose. They know that authority is not a license to dominate others, but a mandate to bring order, healing, and restoration. When authority is exercised with humility, it becomes a channel through which God's power flows freely. When conviction and understanding combine, a believer's words begin to carry weight, not only in the spiritual realm, but also in their own mind. Fear loses its grip. Doubt begins to fade. Confusion gives way to clarity. The believer becomes stable, focused, and resilient. Even when circumstances do not change immediately, their inner posture remains firm. They know that authority is not always proven by instant results, but by unwavering confidence in divine truth. Spiritual authority also influences how a believer responds to opposition. Instead of reacting emotionally, they respond spiritually. Instead of panicking, they discern. Instead of retreating, they stand. They understand that resistance is often a sign that something significant is about to shift. With authority, opposition becomes a challenge to confront, not a threat to fear. A believer who understands authority does not run from battles. They approach them with wisdom and courage. There is also a communal aspect of spiritual authority. When individuals walk in authority, they influence their environment. Their presence changes atmospheres. Their words inspire confidence. Their prayers shift realities not only for themselves, but for others. Authority is contagious when it is authentic. It empowers communities, strengthens families, and transforms institutions. One person who understands and exercises spiritual authority can become a catalyst for widespread change. Ultimately, spiritual authority is activated when a believer realizes that they are not speaking alone. When they pray with understanding and conviction, they are echoing divine will. Their words become aligned with heaven's agenda. In that alignment, their declarations are not mere human speech. They are instruments of divine power. When such a believer speaks, the spiritual realm responds. Circumstances begin to shift, and what once seemed immovable starts to move. Therefore, spiritual authority is not a mystical concept reserved for a few. It is a reality available to every believer who is willing to grow in understanding and conviction. It is the result of a journey from ignorance to revelation, from fear to confidence, from passivity to engagement. And when this authority is activated, prayer becomes more than a ritual. It becomes a force that shapes destiny, transforms situations, and enforces divine settlement in every unresolved case. There is a mystery in the way God works that often confounds human logic. When people encounter situations that seem impossible, their minds search for explanations, strategies, and alternatives. But there are moments when all human options are exhausted, when effort has reached its limit, and when wisdom has no clear answer. It is in such moments that God reveals one of his most profound attributes, his ability to turn impossibilities into testimonies. What humans call impossible is often the raw material God uses to display his power. Impossibility is not a barrier to God. It is an invitation for divine intervention. In the human realm, impossibility means the end of hope. In the divine realm, impossibility is often the beginning of glory. When circumstances reach a point where no human explanation can justify success, God steps in to reveal that his power is not limited by probability, resources, or circumstances. He deliberately chooses moments of impossibility so that his intervention will be unmistakable. Many people spend years fighting situations that seem permanently fixed. They try different approaches, seek advice, invest time, and exert energy, yet nothing changes. Over time, frustration grows and hope begins to fade. But hidden within these moments of frustration is a divine strategy. God often allows situations to reach the point of impossibility so that when change finally comes, it will not be attributed to human effort, but to divine power. This is why some breakthroughs come suddenly after long periods of stagnation. When God turns impossibility into testimony, he does more than solve a problem. He transforms perception. People who once doubted begin to believe. Those who mocked begin to reconsider. The person who endured the struggle begins to see their story differently. What once felt like humiliation becomes a platform for glory. What once felt like defeat becomes evidence of divine favor. Testimony is not just about change, it is about meaning. It is the reinterpretation of pain in the light of divine intervention. Impossibility also serves as a training ground for faith. When everything seems possible, faith is optional. But when everything seems impossible, faith becomes essential. In such moments, a person must decide whether to trust God or surrender to despair. Those who choose to trust God discover a deeper dimension of faith. Their belief is no longer based on convenience, but on conviction. They learn to see beyond visible realities and anchor their hope in divine promises rather than in circumstances. One of the reasons God specializes in impossible situations is that they reveal the limitations of human control. Many people believe they are in control of their lives until they encounter situations that expose their helplessness. These moments are painful, but they are also transformative. They teach humility. They reveal the need for dependence on God. They break the illusion that everything can be managed through human strength. When this illusion is shattered, space is created for divine power to operate. When God intervenes in impossible situations, his solutions often defy human expectations. He does not always follow predictable patterns. Sometimes he uses unlikely people, unexpected opportunities, or unconventional methods. This unpredictability is intentional. It ensures that the outcome cannot be explained by human logic alone. It forces people to acknowledge that something beyond human capacity has occurred. In this way, God not only changes situations, but also reshapes how people understand reality. Another dimension of impossibility is timing. Often, God waits until the last moment before intervening. This delay intensifies the sense of impossibility and amplifies the impact of the breakthrough. When change finally comes, it feels dramatic, sudden, and overwhelming. People often describe such moments as miracles, but behind every miracle is a process of waiting, endurance, and unseen preparation. The testimony that emerges is not just about the moment of change, but about the journey that preceded it. Impossibility also reveals the resilience of the human spirit when aligned with divine purpose. Those who refuse to give up in impossible situations develop an inner strength that cannot be taught in comfortable environments. They learn to stand when others quit. They learn to hope when others despair. They learn to pray when others surrender. This resilience becomes part of their testimony. When God finally intervenes, their story inspires others who are facing similar battles. When impossibility turns into testimony, it often triggers a chain reaction. One breakthrough encourages another person to believe. One testimony ignites faith in a community. One transformed situation challenges collective assumptions about what is possible. In this way, God's intervention in one life becomes a message to many lives. Testimonies are not private victories. They are public evidence that divine power is real. There is also a personal transformation that accompanies impossible breakthroughs. Before the intervention, a person may be fearful, uncertain, and fragile. After the intervention, they often become bold, confident, and purposeful. They realize that if God could change something that seemed impossible, then no situation is beyond hope. This realization reshapes their approach to future challenges. They no longer see obstacles as final. They see them as potential platforms for divine action. Ultimately, the reason God specializes in turning impossibilities into testimonies is that he desires to reveal his nature. He wants people to understand that he is not limited by human definitions of possibility. He wants to demonstrate that his power operates beyond logic, beyond probability, and beyond expectation. When he transforms impossibility into testimony, he is not just solving problems, he is revealing himself. Therefore, what seems impossible today may become tomorrow's testimony. What feels like a dead end may become a turning point. What appears to be the end of a story may become the beginning of a greater narrative. The journey through impossibility is painful, but it is not meaningless. It is often the path through which God prepares his greatest revelations. And when he finally intervenes, the testimony will not only silence doubt, but also proclaim a powerful truth that with God, impossibility is never the end. It is the stage on which his glory is revealed. When God settles a case, the outcome is not temporary, fragile, or uncertain. It is final, decisive, and irreversible. Human systems may revisit decisions, reopen files, and reverse verdicts, but divine settlement operates on a higher authority where no opposing power can successfully challenge the outcome. When God speaks, his word carries absolute authority. When he establishes a verdict, no force, visible or invisible, can overturn it. This is the mystery and assurance of divine settlement. When God settles a case, no power can reopen it. Many people live with fear that even after a breakthrough, their victory might be short-lived. They worry that the problem might return, that the door might close again, or that the peace they have found might be disturbed. This fear often comes from past experiences where human solutions failed or temporary relief ended in disappointment. But divine settlement is fundamentally different. It is not a patch on a broken system. It is a complete transformation of the system itself. When God settles a case, he does not merely adjust circumstances. He redefines the foundation on which those circumstances stand. The permanence of divine settlement is rooted in God's sovereignty. Sovereignty means that God is not subject to negotiation, intimidation, or competition. His authority is not derived from popularity or power struggles. It is inherent in his nature. When he decides to act, no opposing force can successfully resist him. Spiritual opposition may attempt to challenge divine decisions, but it cannot override them. This is why divine settlement brings a unique kind of peace. It is not based on fragile hope, but on the certainty that the matter has been concluded by the highest authority. Another dimension of divine settlement is that it silences accusations. Many people live under constant accusation, sometimes from others, sometimes from circumstances, sometimes from their own minds. They are reminded of their past failures, their mistakes, or their weaknesses. But when God settles a case, he not only changes the situation, he also changes the narrative. Accusations lose their power because the verdict has been rewritten. What once defined a person no longer has authority over them. Divine settlement restores identity as much as it restores circumstances. When God settles a case, he also establishes boundaries. Just as legal systems set boundaries after a verdict, divine settlement sets spiritual boundaries that opposition cannot cross. Situations that once had unlimited influence suddenly encounter invisible limits. Problems that once seemed uncontrollable suddenly lose their reach. This is why some people experience sudden and lasting change after divine intervention. It is not because circumstances magically disappeared, but because God established boundaries that opposition cannot violate. Divine settlement also produces stability. Before settlement, life often feels chaotic, unpredictable, and unstable. Emotions fluctuate with circumstances. Hope rises and falls with external events. But after settlement, there is a sense of groundedness. Even when challenges arise, they no longer carry the same threat. The person knows that the core issue has been resolved. This stability is not arrogance. It is confidence rooted in divine assurance. It is the calm that comes from knowing that the foundation is secure. There is also a transformative effect on perspective. Before divine settlement, a person may see themselves as trapped, powerless, or unlucky. After settlement, they begin to see themselves as chosen, protected, and purposeful. This shift in perspective is not psychological illusion. It is spiritual revelation. When God settles a case, he often reveals to the person who they truly are and what they are truly capable of. This revelation changes how they approach life, challenges, and opportunities. Divine settlement also impacts relationships and environments. When God settles a case in someone's life, it often changes how others relate to them. People who once doubted begin to respect. Those who once opposed begin to reconsider. Environments that once resisted begin to accommodate. This is not manipulation. It is the natural consequence of divine authority manifested in human affairs. When God's verdict becomes evident, human attitudes often shift in response. Another important aspect is that divine settlement often comes with responsibility. When God settles a case, he does not only deliver a person, he often entrusts them with a new level of purpose. The testimony becomes a platform for impact. The breakthrough becomes a tool for service. the victory becomes a message for others. Divine settlement is not only about personal comfort, it is about positioning a person to contribute meaningfully to others. When God settles a case, he often elevates the individual into a new dimension of influence. It is also important to understand that divine settlement does not eliminate all challenges from life. Instead, it changes the nature of challenges. After settlement, battles are no longer about survival, but about growth. Problems are no longer threats to identity, but opportunities for expansion. The person no longer fights from desperation, but from stability. This is the difference between living under unresolved cases and living under divine settlement. The confidence that comes from divine settlement is not pride, it is trust. It is the assurance that God's word is reliable, his decisions are final, and his power is unmatched. This confidence enables a person to move forward without constantly looking back in fear. They no longer live with the anxiety that everything could collapse again. Instead, they walk with quiet certainty that what God has established cannot be undone. The truth that when God settles a case, no power can reopen it is not just comforting, it is empowering. It gives believers courage to face uncertainty, strength to endure delay, and hope to confront impossibility. It reminds them that their lives are not controlled by random forces, but guided by divine authority. And when divine settlement finally manifests, it stands as an unshakable testimony that no opposition, no circumstance, and no power can reverse what God has decided. When God settles a case, it is settled forever. There comes a moment in every journey when the heart realizes that it cannot rely on strength alone, wisdom alone, or effort alone. It is in that moment that the soul discovers the true power of divine settlement. Throughout this message, one truth has echoed clearly. God is not distant from your struggles, and he is not silent in the face of your battles. He is present, attentive, and ready to intervene. Every unresolved case in your life is not a sign of abandonment, but an invitation to deeper faith, greater alignment, and stronger spiritual authority. Delay is not denial. Impossibility is not the end. Opposition is not victory. When you understand that God is a righteous judge, that spiritual roots can be confronted through prayer, and that divine settlement is final, your perspective changes. You no longer see yourself as a victim of circumstances, but as a participant in a divine process. Prayer is not a ritual. It is a weapon, a key, and a bridge. When you pray with understanding and conviction, you are not speaking into emptiness. You are engaging the realm where destinies are decided. And when God responds, his response is not partial. He settles completely, restores fully, and establishes permanently. As you lift your voice in prayer, let your heart be filled with confidence, not fear. Let your words be filled with faith, not doubt. Let your spirit be anchored in the assurance that no matter how long the battle has lasted, no matter how complex the case has become, and no matter how impossible the situation appears, God is able to intervene decisively. Tonight, let hope rise again. Let courage be renewed. Let faith be strengthened. Because when God arises, every unresolved case must bow. Every delay must break. and every impossibility must give way to divine settlement. And when God settles your case, it will not only change your situation, it will become a testimony that will speak for generations.